Hello and welcome to Todd Talk, where insight meets inspiration. I'm your host, Todd Hiller, and I'm an author, speaker, and longtime community leader, here to guide you on a journey towards fulfillment and balance. In every episode, we'll explore ways to fill life's emptiness, helping you uncover practical tools to create harmony, purpose, and happiness. Whether it's thriving in your career, nurturing personal growth, or simply finding joy in the everyday, Todd Talk is your space for real conversations and actionable advice. So let's thrive together, personally, professionally, and beyond. This is Todd Talk, and I'm thrilled to have you here.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Todd Talk. Today, I want to talk about something that might be beneficial for anyone who's struggling with a difficult situation or walking through a problem. And the idea behind this is how to solve difficult problems or how to walk through difficult situations and get to a place where you feel more satisfied with the outcome. I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and they are walking through something difficult with someone in their life, and they just said it's so difficult to get them to see things from my point of view. And when I asked what they meant, they said, well, it's just in their eyes, they don't ever think that there's a problem, or they don't ever understand that they might be part of the issue. And that really, really got me thinking. So we might call this episode something like the mirror in the middle, or maybe, when the problem might be you. Because let's face it, all difficult situations are difficult for each person involved for different reasons. It's not always the same. And I think if we latch onto that and we think that it's always the same issue with everyone involved in the situation, it gets really difficult to work through and walk through because we don't realize that everybody involved might have a different way of thinking, a different perspective, a different way of problem solving, a different level of emotional connection, because obviously not everyone reacts the same, not everyone feels things the same. So when we realize and we remember that everybody working through the situation, everybody playing the game, so to speak, has different cards and different ways to play their hand, that can come into play a lot with how we walk through it and how we work with the other person to find a resolution. I think sometimes the key to solving a tough problem is being willing to examine your own role in it. Not to blame yourself. That's not the case here. Like I've said in previous episodes, I always want you to stand up for yourself and make sure your voice is heard and you speak your mind and let the other person know about the things that are important to you, because that is important, and staying true to what we believe and sticking to our guns and our morals and our moral compass and our integrity, that's all still important, but sometimes we just have to understand it from somebody else's perspective. This brief moment of, quote-unquote, being the problem kind of allows you to unlock a perspective that was previously inaccessible to you because you weren't looking at it that way. And when that happens, I think it can open the door to solutions and maybe some healing and some mutual understanding. And this is not, let's not focus on the word problem. This is not about you being the problem in the situation as much as it's about you taking accountability for the fact that there are different perspectives in each problem and therefore different ways to walk through them with people. I have a friend of mine who's very good at walking through conflict. They're very capable and able to kind of break it apart and ask questions and kind of have this really great discussion to walk through things. And it's never a fight as much as it's a discussion, and it's a way to literally walk through the problem with the other person instead of just saying, I'm going to yell and scream and try to argue and figure out how to make this all go away. Because yelling and screaming and arguing, as we've said before, doesn't ever make the problem better. It typically makes it worse. So imagine you're driving in the rain, let's say. Your side of the windshield is fine. It's mostly clear. You have your windshield wipers on, but your passenger side's foggy and streaked, and they really can't see out of it. But you don't know that because your side looks just fine. And if you've ever ridden in the car, well, especially where I live in New England, you will know that when the temperature changes quickly, inside or outside, all of a sudden it gets fogged up in random parts for random reasons, and windshield wipers don't help, and the defroster takes a minute to react. So just think about that. You're driving along, and you're the driver, and everything's fine. You can see out your side of the windshield perfectly okay. But you look over and your passenger's all tensed up. They've kind of got this white knuckle grip on the door handle, and you finally ask them what's wrong, and they say they can't see anything out their side of the windshield. Now, you lean over and look, and you say, oh gosh, they can't see anything out of their side of the windshield, and you finally understand why they're nervous or why they're upset and why they're worried, but you never realized how obscured their view was until you took the time to look over and see things from their point of view. So instead of just driving along and saying, oh, well, just deal with it, the simple solution is you can clear both sides of the windshield. And if you're actually driving a car, please make sure you pull over to do this. But in the figurative sense, and the sense we're talking about actually solving the problem, making it clear for both of you where you both people have a clear view of the situation and a clear perspective on what's actually going on with the other person is really the best way to solve it and to walk towards a solution together rather than one person feeling satisfied and the other person just feeling like they gave in. And hear me when I say this. That doesn't mean that what your experience in the problem or your upset in the problem is invalid. It just means it's incomplete. Someone else might be struggling even when you think everything is fine. And that's the moral here. You don't know what the other person is looking at, so to speak, until you lean over and kind of look out their side of the windshield or look at the problem from their point of view. And you don't have to stay there forever. If you just lean over and look at their view of the windshield, that's plenty to know that they have a much different view than you and they need a little bit more clarity to get them through that ride or that problem. So you don't have to stay there forever, but you at least have to look. You have to look at what they're going through and try to gain some perspective on their side of the coin and then walk back through it together. I had a difficult situation when I worked after college as a resident director where I had a set of parents show up in my office one day very angry because their view of how I was handling a situation wasn't what I was supposed to be doing. And I was young. I was just out of college. I was in charge of a residence hall. And obviously their perspective was they wanted college life to be easy and enjoyable for their daughter, and her protection was paramount. And I, as a parent now, don't disagree at all. But in the moment when I was young, I was not a parent, and they literally barged into my office and sat down and started pointing their finger at me. So I was a bit defensive. They were throwing around super awful accusations about how bad I was at my job and how I didn't care about my students. And that was obviously not the case. But I didn't understand where they were coming from because my approach to it was, well, listen, dude, you just barged into my office and started literally yelling at me, pointing your finger at me. You're in my place of employment, in my office. You never even asked to be here. You didn't call. You didn't make an appointment. You didn't even knock. So my immediate defensive was to argue back and to, when I went to my superiors, be like, listen, this guy is a giant problem. Here's why. X, Y, and Z happened. And, after the fact, once all the dust settled and once everything was – and, I mean, there was a lot of meetings and a lot of higher-ups involved, and this got drawn out and dragged out, and they eventually, I think, ended up taking their daughter out of residential housing altogether and moved her somewhere. But their concern was that their daughter and her roommate really didn't get along, and they were super different, and they were never going to be anything alike. And their daughter didn't understand how this girl could be the way she was, and she wasn't good for their daughter because she was always partying and bringing back strange men to the room and all these things. And I heard all this, and I wasn't unsympathetic at the time, but I couldn't just allow their accusations to be gospel and just, let the other girl in the room just take the fall and be like, yeah, well, we'll just ship the other girl out because clearly your daughter has this problem and the other girl must be the problem so she can go. So I had a little bit of skin in the game to kind of stand up for both of my residents at that point. But when all the dust settled, at the end of the day, I was part of the problem, not because I didn't care about this family's daughter, not because I wasn't sympathetic to their situation, but because during the situation, all I kept focusing on was the fact that I just couldn't up and move some girl because this other girl didn't like her and her parents didn't like her because that's not the way university life works. But what I failed to see was their perspective that in their eyes, they were so concerned about their daughter's well-being and her college experience in general that they didn't know what else to do, so they just kept calling me and tried to demand that this girl get moved out. Now, we could have probably found a better situation, but it was really tough in the moment, but that was on me. I was part of the problem in that situation. I never took the time to look at it from a mom and dad's perspective and say, hey, what the heck would I do if this was my kid? What would I do if this was my brother or little sister or best friend or whatever? I never gave myself that onus to look at it from their perspective, and it made it a much more difficult situation to deal with. Had I jumped on that train a lot sooner and kind of taken a look from their perspective, I probably would have met them with less resentment, with less anger, with less frustration, and said, hey, please sit down. Let's talk about your concerns. I'm sorry that I have not handled it, the way you think is appropriate up until this point, but let's find a way to get to a solution that everybody's happy and comfortable with. It might take some doing, but let's go ahead and do that. And I didn't do that. Instead, I stayed defensive. I stayed frustrated. I stayed angry. And I kind of made them the problem, and I failed to look at it from anybody else's perspective except mine as the person who was trying to deal with two really upset, angry, and frustrated and difficult parents. So sometimes we are definitely the problem, and I think a perspective shift can go a long way. Now, it took me a long time to look at it from that perspective, probably a couple years after I had walked through this entire incident, but I did do it. But if you can do it in the moment, if we can remind ourselves to do it while things are unfolding and while we're trying to solve the problem and walk through the issue and work through things, I think that'll do us a lot better than trying to just solve it quickly and then maybe look at it 2 years later. So get in the habit of doing that. Make sure you're always thinking about the other person's perspective. Now, that being said, I will still stand up for myself and say that I was still sticking to my guns, that I cannot just up and move some other freshman college student because somebody's parents didn't like her. That's not fair to that girl at all, in any way, shape, or form. So I still stayed with my integrity on that one, saying, hey, listen, that's not how the process works. I understand everybody's different and not every person is going to get along with their roommate, but I can't just automatically make the other girl take the fall. That's not right. Everybody deserves a voice. Everybody deserves to have their side of the story heard. So we're not just going to do that. We're not going to take your word as the law, as the gospel, and just boot your daughter's roommate out. So I stuck with that, and I stood up for what I believed in, and I'm good with that. I'm happy with that I wasn't willing to let them bully me into just making a decision based on their opinion of their daughter's roommate. So I was proud of myself in that moment, still am about that, but it could have done a lot of good for me to look at that from their perspective and kind of looked at myself as, hey, where's your role in this and can you do anything different? And that's something you can do. It doesn't necessarily have to be, hey, I'm the problem. It can just be, hey, where do I fall in this? What's my role in working through this and walking through this? And when it comes to disagreements, like other disagreements, obviously this was a couple angry parents that were involved with me, but if it comes with something that's between you and a spouse, you and a best friend, you and a significant other, you and a parent, whoever it is in your life, a coworker, doesn't matter. When it's specifically you and one other person, that perspective shift still works the same way. So the idea and the goal isn't to blame yourself, but it's about a way to unlock new information that you potentially hadn't thought about before. This is also really helpful, just as an aside. If you're working through a problem in your life, find someone in your life that you can talk to about things like this who offers other outside perspective. I have someone in my life who's really good at this. They are very good at reframing things for me and asking me those questions like, hey, so basically what you're saying is you can either do X or Y. How do you feel about that? And which one are you leaning towards? And then why? Tell me about that. And sometimes they can clear up so much frustration and so much fog just by asking me those simple questions. So if you have a person in your life who you talk to about things and kind of come to, whether it's a mentor or a best friend or whoever it is, bring that to them and say, hey, I need some new perspective on this. Can you give me some outside perspective, maybe an objective point of view, and help me walk through this and work through this? And it's okay if you have to say that maybe I should change or maybe I'm part of the problem. And also, this isn't a message just to give up. Like I said before, an argument is not won by when one person gets what they want and the other person just rolls over and says fine and just appeases the other person. That's not good for the situation on a whole. It's also not good for either person because it's a recipe for disaster with future disagreements or future problems that you walk through. But empathy, the power of empathy is huge because empathy isn't necessarily agreement. Empathy isn't rolling over and just agreeing to go along and just saying, yes, fine, I give in, you win, even though you don't want that to happen. Empathy gives us the ability to understand someone else's point, and then we can see their side of the issue, and then we can also reiterate our side of the issue. So don't get lost in feeling like being empathetic to the other person's problem or perspective is weak. It's not that at all. It's important because if you take the time to look at it from their point of view and you take the time to have some empathy for what they're feeling, and I always say when it comes to disagreements, how would I feel if the situation was reversed? Right now, I feel X, Y, and Z. How would I feel if the other person was me and I was in this same situation? And oftentimes, even just that little bit of reframing can give you the clarity you need, because consistent clarity and walking through things one piece at a time and always being able to reverse that in your mind and saying, well, how would I feel? What am I doing that would also be frustrating to this person? That can go a long, long way. So don't be afraid to just simply turn the narrative reversed or on its head or backwards, whatever way you want to look at it. Do that as well, because if you do that, a lot of times that's a super quick step into saying, oh, man, yeah, I guess if the situation was reversed, I'd be upset too, or I'd be frustrated too, or I would want more information too, just like this other person in my life does. So never be afraid to just reverse it. Just flip it backwards and put yourself in their shoes and put them in your shoes. And I think that's another really big part of it. Don't just put yourself in their shoes. Put them in your shoes and say, okay, if I'm doing this and I'm saying this and this is what I'm feeling in the problem, flip it around. What if this person did those things to me or said those things to me, or this was the situation that we were in, but they were in this position and I was in this position? And doing that a lot of times can settle a lot of the bubbling anger and frustration and turmoil that you typically feel in the beginning or the middle of an argument. And I have done that countless times. Like, hey, Hiller, let's flip this around and think about it from their point of view. How would you feel if this was what they were saying or doing to you? And sometimes it stops me right there, and it's enough to just flip things right around, let me take that breath I need, and walk through things a lot more peacefully. We talked about the windshield analogy, so give yourself that pause. What does this view look like from the other seat? What does it look like if I'm the other person and they're me? And I'm walking through this very same thing. Then what? And when you keep walking through these, I want you to remember a few things. Okay, this is not a I'm right or they're right or I'm wrong or they're wrong, all in total situation where there can only be one outcome. Any disagreement, any difficult thing to walk through is never cut and dry. Period, end of story. And I know that was a pun in and of itself because that sounded cut and dry, the whole period, end of story. However, difficult situations, they aren't like that. They aren't short. They aren't easy. They aren't sweet. They aren't tied into a neat little bow. There's lots of feelings. There's lots of perspectives. There's lots of things. And sometimes the longer things get drawn out and the longer we don't talk about things, the worse things get. So remember, it's not about blame. It's about balance. Letting go of blame to restore mutual understanding goes a long way, and it will bring you to such a better place when it comes to walking through things. It's not, it's not a flaw to do that. It's not a flaw. It's a frame shift. Okay, it's looking at it from a different point of view and reframing everything within that disagreement or that argument or that difficult situation or that problem to give yourself a way to look back on things instead of looking at it forward. The problem is sometimes when we get so close to a problem, obviously if we are in it, we're too close sometimes to see every part of it that we need to see. How often have you done this? You've had friends or family members or colleagues or anybody who you've seen arguing and you've had that outside objective point of view, and you look at them and you're like, wow, boy, they're missing the boat here. If he just said this to her, like things would get solved and get fixed super quickly, but gosh, why can't he see that? Or why can't she see that he's mad about this one thing? Or why can't she see that she's mad about this other thing? And I think that when we are in the problem, when we're right in the thick of it, so to speak, we can't do that all the time because we're too close to it. It's not because we don't want to see it. It's not because we're being obtuse or difficult, but sometimes we just get too close and we can't see the forest through the trees, as the old saying goes. We can't see the bigger problem. We see one tree right in front of us. That's all we see, and it's blocking our path. We don't see, if you take 10 steps back and look at the whole situation, there's a very easy path through all of this. Walk around that tree on the left and keep going straight, and then take a right and you'll be out of the woods. We don't see that because what we see right in front of us is that big giant tree. Problems are the same. Take a step back and look at the whole situation. Sometimes, too, when you argue with someone or when someone... This is common, I think, in lots of our lives. If we're doing something at home, something random, you're going to make a sandwich and you take the mayonnaise out of the fridge and, you set it down and you set it on the counter and you make your sandwich and you haven't put the mayonnaise back in the fridge yet. And the other person in the room screams, "Put the mayonnaise back!" And you're like, whoa. Like, I haven't even finished, putting the sandwich together. I'll put it back. Pro tip, it's not about the mayonnaise being on the counter. It's about something else. So you need to take a step back and be like, okay, well, listen, mayonnaise on the counter is not a big deal for 45 seconds. What the heck else is bothering this other person in my life? And the mayonnaise was just the last thing that they had to kind of tip the Richter scale that they kind of lost their mind about. So have that ability to take a step back or take a high-level view. If you want to look at it from above and that's easier for you to visualize, you can do that too. If you think of a drone view, Think of how much you can see of any situation, from a drone, whether, I don't care. Listen, I'm a firefighter. If you have a forest fire and you're standing right in the middle of it, you might say, oh, I see a little fire right there. If you launch a drone into the air and go up to 1,000 feet, you might say, oh, God, there's a fire here, a fire there, a fire there. There's 9 fires from here to there, and there's 6 fires going across from here to there. We have a much bigger problem than we thought. So whether it's a step back or a step up into the, that high altitude view, find ways to do that. And not everybody's way to do that will be the same. It's perfectly okay if what works for you doesn't work for your best friend or your colleague or whatever. Everybody can walk through things differently and take different views, but that's the beauty of having different perspectives is, one, if you are in a problem, make sure you're finding ways to look at it from different perspectives, especially the other person's. And if you're helping someone through conflict or you're helping someone through something difficult or a disagreement, make sure you're taking the time to do that for them too. Look at it from high up or look at it from stepped way back and give them that outside perspective of, hey, listen, I'm seeing X, Y, and Z. What do you think about that? Or I'm seeing, A, B, and C. What do you think your part in that is or what your role in that is? So as we wind down, remember a couple things. So empathy before ego, okay? Put people ahead of your personal comfort. And that doesn't mean that you always have to be uncomfortable. It just means you need to consider the other person's point of view and the other person's discomfort in the situation, including yours. And also remember, it's not about fault, it's about forward. Blame delays progress, and insight helps accelerate it. So do that for yourself and the other person. This is not someone's fault specifically. This is a problem that has arisen that you and the other people or the other person need to walk through and find a solution to. It's not our job as people to point fingers and assign blame. The minute you try to assign blame or to say this is your fault, it becomes a messy nightmare of he said, she said, or lots of finger pointing, and it doesn't actually become a discussion anymore. It becomes an argument back and forth with this tit for tat. Well, you did this. Well, you did this. And that's awful. It's not productive. So take that out of it. Make sure you're looking at the situation and trying to look at it as a whole instead of a back and forth, trying to solve the actual issue, not pushing blame onto other people, and also not accepting blame on yourself or fault of yourself when it's not warranted. If the other person starts doing that, try to remind them, hey, listen, this is not about he said, she said. This is not about me and you and what we've done wrong and tit for tat back and forth. This is a disagreement we are having about X, and we need to find a way to work through this. So let's work the problem and find a solution rather than working on bashing each other and blaming each other. I wrote I write notes for these podcasts sometimes and just jot some things down. And one of the things I wrote down was when you drop the mirror, you make room for the window. And I really liked that. And I wasn't sure how or if I was going to put it into this episode, but I like that as a way to kind of wrap up on, because a lot of times when we have problems, we only see ourselves. We hold up a mirror and we say, oh, poor me. And listen, I will tell you, I'm guilty of this. I'm not too proud to admit it. Very often we have a problem or a disagreement and we have a mirror in our hands and we say, oh, poor me. Look, there's little Todd. Poor Todd. Everything's going wrong, and we hold up a mirror. But if you let go of that, if you set that down and replace it and trade it in for a window, you get to do 2 things. One, you don't focus only on yourself and only on your side of the problem, but you also get to see other people and their involvement in the problem. Instead of all you're seeing is yourself staring back at you with the, hey, this is really awful for me, aw, shucks, this is a terrible situation for us to be in, bestie. You get to see the other people and their involvement, and oftentimes you get to see their heartache involved in it, their pain, their frustration, their anger, and when you get to see those things, then you can realize that it's a big issue to work on that needs to be solved and picked apart at and walked through, and not just a ball of anger and frustration to be thrown back and forth between the people involved. So as we close, just one more thought. I think growth doesn't always come from being right. Sometimes it comes from being willing to see what we're missing. And the moment you see the fog from someone else's seat, so to speak, the road ahead gets much clearer for both of you. And the same is true with our problems and our willingness to look at things from other people's perspectives. So as we close and as we wind down, I want to remind you of a few things. Always stand up for yourself. Always make sure you are saying what's on your mind and holding your integrity in high regard and sticking to your guns and making sure you don't get stepped on and walked over, and that you don't just roll over and say fine, and you're not just appeasing the other person. But at the same time, please make sure when it comes to an argument or a disagreement, you are looking at the whole picture and not just your part in it. I know things can be super difficult to walk through. I know conflict is not people's favorite thing in the world. To be quite honest, it's not my favorite thing in the world either. But I have found myself in situations where I need to take that outside perspective, and it's always gone so much better when I have realized that I am not the only one with the problem. So if you are working through something difficult, walking through something difficult, I hope this episode has been helpful. If there is someone in your life who you think it might resonate with, please share this with them. Send it off their way. And as always, thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the message. And as I cannot say this enough, thanks so much for being here, for all of your time spent listening. I appreciate you so, so much. Take care, guys. Thanks for tuning in to Todd Talk. If you've liked what you've heard, please go ahead and subscribe and follow along so you don't miss any updates or new episodes. Thanks very much and enjoy the rest of your day.